Chapter-4 Trip to America. At Cape Comorin, the Swami became as excited as a child. He rushed to the temple to worship the Divine Mother. He prostrated himself before the Virgin Goddess. As he came out and looked at the sea, his eyes fell on a rock. Swimming to an islet through shark-infested waters, he sat on a stone. His heart thumped with emotion. His great journey from the snow-capped Himalayas to the land's end was completed. He had traveled the whole length of the Indian subcontinent, his beloved motherland, which together with his earthly mother was, as he said, superior to heaven itself. Sitting on the stone, he recalled what he had seen with his own eyes, the pitiable condition of the Indian masses, victims of the unscrupulous whims of their rulers, landlords and priests. The tyranny of caste had sapped their last drop of blood. In most of the so-called leaders who shouted from the housetops for liberation of the people, he had seen selfishness personified. And now he asked himself what his duty was in this situation. Should he regard the world as a dream and go into solitude to commune with God? He had tried this several times, but without success. He remembered that as a sannyasin he had taken the vow to dedicate himself to the service of God. But this God, he was convinced, was revealed through humanity. And his own service to this God must begin, therefore, with the humanity of India. As he exclaimed, "May I be born again and again, and suffer 1,000 miseries, if only I may worship the only God in whom I believe, the sum total of all souls, and above all, my God the wicked, my God the afflicted, my God, the poor of all races." Through austerity and self-control, the Swami had conserved a great spiritual power. His mind had been filled with the wisdom of the East and the West. He had received in abundance Sri Ramakrishna's blessings. He also had had many spiritual experiences of his own. He must use all of these assets, he concluded, for the service of God in man. But what was to be the way? The clear-eyed prophet saw that religion was the backbone of the Indian nation. India would rise through a renewal and restoration of that highest spiritual consciousness which had made her at all times the cradle of nations and the cradle of faith. He totally disagreed with foreign critics and their Indian disciples who held that religion was the cause of India's downfall. The Swami blamed rather the falsehood, superstition, and hypocrisy that were practiced in the name of religion. The Swami himself had discovered that the knowledge of God's presence in man was the source of man's strength and wisdom. He was determined to awaken this sleeping divinity. He knew that the Indian culture had been created and sustained by the twin ideals of renunciation and service, which form the core of Hinduism. And he believed that if the national life could be intensified through these channels, everything else would take care of itself. The workers for India's regeneration must renounce selfishness, jealousy, greed, and lust for power. And they must dedicate themselves to the service of the poor, the illiterate, the hungry, and the sick, seeing in them the tangible manifestations of the Godhead. People required education and food, health, and the knowledge of science and technology to raise their standard of living. The attempt to teach metaphysics to empty stomachs was sheer madness. The masses everywhere were leading the life of animals on account of ignorance and poverty and famine. Therefore, these conditions should be removed. So felt the Swami. But where would the Swami find the fellow workers to help him in this gigantic task? He wanted whole-time servants of God, workers without worldly ties or vested interests, and he wanted them by thousands. His eyes fell upon the numerous monks who had renounced the world in search of God. But alas, in present-day India, most of those led unproductive lives. He would have to infuse a new spirit into them, and they in turn would have to dedicate themselves to the service of the people. He hit upon a plan, which he revealed later in a letter to a friend. As the Swami wrote, "Suppose some disinterested sannyasins, bent on doing good to others, went from village to village, disseminating education and seeking in various ways to better the condition of all, down to the untouchable, through oral teaching and by means of maps, magic, lanterns, globes, and other accessories. Would that not bring forth good in time? All these plans I cannot write out in this brief letter. The long and short of it is that if the mountain does not come to Muhammad, Muhammad must go to the mountain. The poor are too poor to go to schools. They will gain nothing by reading poetry and all that sort of thing. We, as a nation, have lost our individuality. We have to give back to the nation its lost individuality and raise the masses." Verily, the Swami at Kanyakumari was the patriot and prophet in one. There he became, as he declared later to a Western disciple, a condensed India. But where were the resources to come from to help him realize his great vision? The Swami himself was a sannyasin, a penniless beggar. The rich of the country talked big and did nothing. His admirers were poor. Suddenly a heroic thought entered his mind. He must approach the outside world and appeal to its conscience. But he was too proud to act like a beggar. He wanted to tell the West that the health of India and the sickness of India were the concern of the whole world. If India sank, the whole world would sink with her. For the outside world, in turn, needed India, her knowledge of the soul and of God, her spiritual heritage, her ideal of genuine freedom through detachment and renunciation. India needed these in order to extricate itself from the sharp claws of the monster of materialism. Then, too, the Swami, brooding alone in silence on that point of rock off the tip of India, the vision came. There flashed before his mind the new continent of America, a land of optimism, great wealth, and unstinted generosity. He saw America as a country of unlimited opportunities, where people's minds were free from the encumbrance of caste and classes. He would give the receptive Americans the ancient wisdom of India and bring back to his motherland, in exchange, the knowledge of science and technology. If he succeeded in his mission to America, he would not only enhance India's prestige in the Occident, but create a new confidence among his own people. He recalled the earnest request of his friends to represent India in the forthcoming Parliament of Religions in Chicago. And in particular, he remembered the words of the friends in Kathiawar, who had been the first to encourage him to go to the West, saying, "Go and take it by storm, and then return." So the Swami swam back to the continent of India and started northwards again, by the eastern coast. It may be mentioned here that during the Swami's trip across the country, just described, there had taken place many incidences that strengthened his faith in God, intensified his sympathy for the so-called lower classes, and broaden his general outlook on life and social conventions. Several times when he had had nothing to eat, food had come to him unsought from unexpected quarters. The benefactors had told him that they were directed by God. Then, one day, it had occurred to the Swami that he had no right to lead the life of a wandering monk, begging his food from door to door, and thus depriving the poor of a few morsels which they could otherwise share with their families. Forthwith he entered a deep forest and walked the whole day without eating a grain of food. At nightfall he sat under a tree, footsore and hungry, and waited to see what would happen next. Presently he saw a tiger approaching, and he said, "Oh, this is right. Both of us are hungry. As this body of mine could not be of any service to my fellow men, let it at least give some satisfaction to this hungry animal." So the Swami sat there calmly, but the tiger, for some reason or other, changed its mind and went off in another direction. The Swami spent the whole night in the forest, meditating on God's inscrutable ways. In the morning, he felt a new surge of power. During his wanderings in the Himalayas, he was once the guest of a Tibetan family and was scandalized to see that polyandry was practiced by its members, 6 brothers sharing a common wife. To the Swami's protest, the eldest brother replied that a Tibetan would consider it selfishness to enjoy a good thing all by himself and not share it with his brothers. After deep thought, the Swami realized the relativity of ethics. He saw that many so-called good and evil practices had their roots in the traditions of society. One might argue for or against almost anything. The conventions of a particular society should be judged by its own standards. After that experience, the Swami was reluctant to condemn hastily the traditions of any social group. One day, Swamiji was sharing a railway compartment with 2 Englishmen, who took him for an illiterate beggar and began to crack jokes in English at his expense. At the next station, they were astonished to hear him talking with the station master in perfect English. Embarrassed, they asked him why he had not protested against their rude words. With a smile, the Swami replied, "Friends, this is not the first time that I have seen fools." The Englishmen became angry and wanted a fight. But looking at the Swami's strong body, they thought that discretion was the better part of valor and apologized. In a certain place in Rajputana, the Swami was busy for 3 days and nights by people seeking religious instruction. Nobody cared about his food or rest. After they left, a poor man belonging to a low caste offered him, with great hesitation, some uncooked food, since he, being an untouchable, was afraid to give him a prepared meal. The Swami, however, persuaded the kind-hearted man to prepare the meal for him and ate it with relish. Shedding tears of gratitude, the Swami said to himself, "Thousands of such good people live in huts, and we despise them as untouchables." In central India, he had to pass many hard days without food or shelter, and it was during this time that he lived with a family of outcast sweepers and discovered the many priceless spiritual virtues of those people, who cowered at the feet of society. Their misery choked him, and he sobbed, "Oh, my country! Oh, my country!" To resume the story of Swamiji's wandering life, from Cape Comorin he walked most of the way to Madras, stopping at Ramnad and Pondicherry. His fame had already spread to the premier city of South India, and he was greeted by a group of enthusiastic young men. In Madras, he publicly announced his intention of going to America. His devotees here collected funds for the trip, and it was through them that he later started his Indian work in an organized form. But here in Madras, he poured his whole soul into the discussion of religion, philosophy, science, literature, and history. He would blaze up at people who, for lack of time or zeal, did not practice meditation. He thundered at one listener, "What? Those giants of old, the ancient rishis, who never walked but strode, standing by whose side you would shrivel into a moth? They, sir, had time for meditation and devotions, and you have none?" To a scoffer he said, "How dare you criticize your venerable forefathers in such a fashion? A little learning has muddled your brain. Have you tested the wisdom of the rishis? Have you even as much as read the Vedas? There is a challenge thrown by the rishis. If you dare oppose them, take it up." At Hyderabad, the capital of the Nizam state, he gave his first public lecture, the subject being "My Mission to the West." The audience was impressed, and the Swami was pleased to see that he could hold his own in this field of activity. When the devotees in Madras brought him the money for his voyage to America, he refused to accept it and asked them to distribute it among the poor. How was he to know that the Lord wanted him to go to America? Perhaps he was being carried away by his own ambition. He began to pray intensely for divine guidance. Again, money was offered to him by some of his wealthy friends, and again he refused. He said to his disciples, "If it is the mother's wish that I should go to the West, then let us collect money from the people. It is for them that I am going to the West, for the people and the poor." The Swami one day had a symbolic dream in which he saw Sri Ramakrishna walking into the water of the ocean and beckoning him to follow. He also heard the authoritative word, "Go." In response to a letter that he had written to Sarada Devi, the Holy Mother and spiritual wife of Ramakrishna, she gave him her blessings for the fulfillment of his desire, knowing that it was Ramakrishna's wish that he should undertake the journey to America. And now, at last, he felt sure of his call.